American immigrants are concerned that changes to immigration policy will impact their families. President-elect Trump has said he will deport 2 to 3 million undocumented immigrants, leaving policymakers and families on pins and needles. With more, we go to Brooke Evans, live in the studio.
Thanks, Megan. During his campaign, President-elect Donald Trump took a hardline stance on immigration, promising to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, as well as start the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. Was his campaign rhetoric just a ploy to get votes, and will he ultimately soften his position? Let's take a look.
President-elect Donald Trump's hard-line immigration stance was a central part of his campaign message, with plans to deport millions of undocumented immigrants.
Probably 2 million, it could even be 3 million. We're getting them out of our country or we're going to incarcerate. But we're getting them out of our country. They're here illegally.
However, Trump's proposed plans require a federal effort that would be difficult to coordinate. So what might actually happen?
So I think what's most likely is that he'll strengthen security along the border, attempt to complete the wall, and most of all, what he's likely to do is try and empty the jails of felons who are undocumented, unauthorized, and conduct deportations with them. That way he can say he conducted deportations, but I doubt very, very much that he's going to lay hands on others who have not been convicted of a felony.
We will build the wall, yes. We will build the wall.
Trump's immigration plans also focus on building a wall along the border between the U.S. and Mexico, which has some minority groups uneasy.
I'm more just anxious and worried to see what he will do, because no one really knows. I don't even think he knows what he's going to do, and that's the weirdest part. Clinton had actual policies, and Trump kind of well, he didn't have any policies really.
Ongoing protests. This week we've seen colleges and universities across the country calling themselves sanctuaries for undocumented students, meaning that they won't cooperate with federal authorities seeking students for deportation. For District Wire News, I'm Brooke Evans.
In Syria, at least 64 civilians were killed in airstrikes over the weekend in the besieged city of Aleppo. Planes from the Russian and Syrian air forces bombed the city's last remaining hospitals. Nearly 250,000 civilians on the city's rebel-controlled eastern neighborhoods are cut off from food, water, and medical aid. There's growing concern worldwide for the millions of Syrian refugees who are displaced. This has been heavily debated in the past U.S. election, as well as how to respond worldwide. To talk more about the current humanitarian crisis in Syria, we welcome Daryl Grisgraber, Senior Advocate for Refugees International. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
So let's start off with some background. What has the United States' involvement in Syria looked like over the past several years, and how has it changed or developed?
Yeah, so it's been mostly humanitarian aid, trying to facilitate the refugee process, and certainly some involvement in the various sets of peace talks that have gone on. There has not been specific military intervention, although they are of course part of a coalition that's doing airstrikes. So the bulk of it has been humanitarian and geared toward internally displaced persons and refugees, because right now there doesn't seem to be much appetite for a formal sort of official military intervention in Syria.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that this involvement might change? So did it start off as more humanitarian, and did this coalition kind of come into play, or how is that developed?
I think toward the beginning it was much more specifically humanitarian, and once there was this whole idea of ISIS being involved, that was when the talk about military involvement and building a coalition really started to amp up. But the fact is that people have been talking about a peace process right from the very beginning, and the U.S. has always been instrumental in trying to move that along and have those talks. What might happen next year, it's hard to say. I mean, I think there are a lot of question marks about what the new administration is planning to do, and we just have to sort of wait and see and be quick on our feet.
Definitely, definitely. There's a lot of questions from what the new administration will instill and what will continue happening in Syria. But so we just heard in the package about how the last remaining hospital in Aleppo was bombed. So can you talk a little bit about what the conflict looks like on the ground and the humanitarian need that's there right now?
Yeah, it is severe, and Aleppo, unfortunately, is I think probably one of the worst situations we're seeing in the course of the Syrian conflict right now. As you said, the last hospital is gone, and even toward the beginning of the conflict, I remember I was traveling there, and a doctor told us there were something like 30 doctors left in Aleppo for hundreds of thousands of people. So you can imagine that situation only deteriorated as things went along. But civilian structures like hospitals, schools, for example, bakeries are being targeted by the various parties who are armed and carrying out this conflict. And in Aleppo in particular, East Aleppo is basically under siege right now. The last I heard is there's maybe 1 week's left of food provisions for everyone in the city, and we're talking a couple 100,000 people. So people have no food, they often don't have clean water. Shelter is hard to come by, and people are living in mostly damaged buildings and whatnot. There's very little medical care, very few psychosocial services. Kids aren't going to school, as you might imagine. So really, all of the humanitarian concerns that traditionally we would worry about, they're all sort of at rock bottom in Syria right now.
And what kind of role is the U.S. playing in Aleppo? Are we there? Are we giving humanitarian aid?
There is some going in. Now, right now, humanitarian access into Syria is very, very difficult. So there are a lot of local organizations who are sort of first responders in doing some aid, but as far as donors getting a lot into the country, it's quite limited. And so much of the aid we hear about is going to the refugees in the surrounding country. And fair enough, they also need the help, and that's where we can get access to people. But these constant pushes, particularly through the Security Council resolutions, to have access inside of Syria is a symptom of the fact that not enough aid is getting in there. And so the U.S. is doing plenty. I mean, there are billions of dollars that have gone into Syria at this point, but some of it is inside Syria, some of it is outside for the refugee crisis, and we really just need to build a lot more on what's happening inside the country.
So let's talk a little bit moving to the refugee crisis. It's estimated that there are currently 12.5 million Syrian people who have been displaced from their homes, and as you can see here in this graphic, the U.S. resettled about 12,486 Syrian refugees in 2016. What has been the United States policy for resettling Syrian refugees?
Yeah. The official policy is the same as for people of any nationality. People need to be vetted by the United Nations. They can be referred to the United States, and then there are extensive interviews and security checks determining whether or not people can come here. Because the need for Syrians was so great, there has been some focus, and you've probably heard about this in the media, about can we get more Syrians here? I mean, it's not that usual that a particular population gets that sort of input from the American public, bring them here sort of thing. So that has been a bit unusual for Syrians, and it's had some results. I mean, there's still this ongoing debate about whether we should resettle Syrians at all in this country. But for the most part, Syrians have been incorporated into the system in the way that all nationalities are, and even some of the numbers were upped last year in order to accommodate potentially more people from the Middle East, Syrians in practical terms. Yeah.
And the Obama administration set the goal of resettling at least 10,000, so that's been met.
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate. I think a lot of people didn't think it would happen by the end of the fiscal year, but yeah, we're there.
And so we have a quote from Obama where he's talking about urging action from the world's leaders.
It is our moral obligation as fellow human beings to help people who are in such vulnerable situations.
So that was President Obama talking about how it's important for nations to open their countries. And I know the Obama administration has been pushing for this kind of resettlement. And how is your organization, in particular Refugees International, preparing for any policy changes that might come with the new administration?
Yeah, it's something that we're talking a lot about, and again, I think none of us are qualified to predict exactly what will happen, but we do a lot of advocacy with the U.S. government, with the United Nations, with other national governments as well, and so I think constantly trying to figure out what the messages are that are going to resonate with everyone. Whether people are fans of welcoming refugees or not, we have to find something in there that the way we talk about it that makes people understand that this is a crucial issue and that refugees need protection and we need to keep taking them in. And I think it remains to be seen exactly how we're going to be able to talk about those things. And a lot of the difference for us will be the people who are in office or in the administration and how they respond to us. But I think our work itself isn't going to change. It's probably just going to be a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think an ideal path towards peace in Syria would look like? A political solution to the crisis. I think that's what we've been pushing for right from the beginning, right? At this point, there are so many armed actors and sort of allies and proxies involved that it's really going to take some effort to sort all of those out. And if everyone needs to be made happy, maybe that can't happen. And there's also this debate about whether or not Assad is going to stay or go, and whether or not there can be a transition with him there. So that has to be figured out pretty rapidly. Thank you so much for joining us, Daryl. That was Daryl Grisgraber, Senior Advocate for Refugees International. That's all for this special edition of District Wire News. I'm Lindsay Maizland.
And I'm Megan Yoder. You can catch us online at districtwirenews.com. Good night.